A buyer doesn't have to sneak through a back alley anymore. They can open a government-linked portal, scroll past catalog photos of drones and missile systems, and read a line that sounds like it was written for a world under permanent sanctions. Payment can be the cryptocurrency agreed upon in the contract. That language sits in plain view on the site tied to Iran's Ministry of Defense Export Center, known as MINEX. This isn't a leaked memo or an intercepted shipment. According to the Financial Times, the portal is real, hosted on Iranian infrastructure that has already drawn U.S. sanctions attention, and it advertises advanced military hardware while assuring buyers that sanctions won't stop delivery. CoinDesk also reported that the site lists crypto alongside local currency and barter as accepted settlement options. The message is blunt. You can't freeze what you can't seize, and you can't block what never touches a Western bank. U.S. officials have been warning where this heads. In a September 2025 action, the U.S. Treasury described Iran's reliance on shadow banking networks to move millions through the international financial system in support of its military. The Associated Press reported that the same enforcement wave targeted facilitators accused of moving more than $100 million in cryptocurrency tied to Iranian oil sales. If a state can sell weapons and clear payment as digital value outside the dollar's reach, what happens to the deterrent power of sanctions when the invoice can settle in minutes, with no bank to call? The point of sanctions is friction. Banks hesitate, insurers back away, shipping paperwork becomes radioactive, and even a willing buyer has trouble turning intent into payment. That is why Iran putting cryptocurrency agreed upon in the contract into the FAQ of a state-linked arms export portal is not a gimmick. It's an attempt to remove friction at the one place sanctions are supposed to bite hardest: settlement. According to the Financial Times, Iran's Ministry of Defense Export Center, MINDEX, is openly marketing advanced military systems and presenting crypto rials and barter as ways to pay, while insisting sanctions won't stop delivery. CoinDesk reported the same payment language and framed it as a rare public case of a nation-state advertising crypto as a channel for weapons exports. U.S. enforcement filings read like the backstory to that menu. The Treasury Department has repeatedly described Iranian shadow banking networks that move funds for the IRGC-CQF and other sanctioned entities, using front companies and exchange houses to blur origin and destination. And when crypto shows up in these networks, it's not pocket change. The Associated Press reported that U.S. sanctions in September 2025 accused facilitators of purchasing more than $100 million in cryptocurrency tied to Iranian oil sales, routed through a web of offshore firms. Chainalysis, analyzing the same action, said those purchases were directly connected to oil proceeds and ran through a crypto-enabled shadow banking structure. If you want more reporting-grade breakdowns like this where finance meets hard power, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. Your support is what lets me keep producing videos that follow the money all the way to the weapons rack. All the data sources mentioned in this video are listed in the description. Sanctions work the way a tourniquet works. You don't have to stop every muscle from moving. You squeeze the artery. For Iran, the artery is settlement in dollars and the web of correspondent banking that makes global trade routine. When a state-linked export portal says payment can be in the cryptocurrency agreed upon in the contract, it's trying to slip a hand under that tourniquet and loosen it just enough to keep blood moving. The MINDEX FAQ doesn't hide the intent. It places crypto right alongside cash, rials, credit terms, and barter, as if this were normal procurement logistics, not the business of missiles and drones. The U.S. government has spent years describing how Iran adapts when the banking system gets hostile. According to FinCEN's October 2025 financial trend analysis on Iranian shadow banking, Iran relies on networks of Iran-based exchange houses and foreign companies that give sanctioned entities access to the U.S. dollar and the U.S. financial system through correspondent accounts. FinCEN says those networks are used to sell oil abroad, launder proceeds, and fund activities that include advancing military weapons programs. FinCEN's dataset pointed to roughly $9 billion in 2024 activity tied to potential Iranian shadow banking. And it notes heavy use of UAE and Hong Kong-linked structures, including shell companies that move funds through complex corporate plumbing. That matters because crypto doesn't replace the old system. It often rides on the same incentives. Iran's playbook has always been about converting trapped value into usable value. A decade ago, the conversion was literal metal. In the Hawkbank case, U.S. prosecutors alleged a multi-billion-dollar scheme designed to move Iranian oil and gas proceeds that were restricted by sanctions, using false documentation and front companies to disguise the flows. The Department of Justice described it as a sanctions evasion and money laundering operation that used the U.S. financial system while hiding Iranian interests. Reuters has reported that prosecutors accused the scheme of moving about $20 billion in restricted funds. The lesson wasn't Turkey or gold. The lesson was that sanctioned money looks for a translator, something that turns blocked proceeds into a form that can travel. Crypto can be that translator when the right conditions line up. A buyer needs discretion, a seller needs speed, and both sides want fewer points where a bank compliance officer can say no. That doesn't mean it's clean or easy. It means the choke point shifts. Instead of persuading a bank to clear a payment, you persuade a broker to source liquidity, a facilitator to route it, an exchange to convert it, a shell company to invoice it, and a logistics chain to deliver it. The Treasury Department has been unusually explicit about how those facilitators work. In a June 2025 action, Treasury said Iran's parallel settlement system is brokered through Iran-based exchange houses using front companies outside Iran in places like the UAE and Hong Kong to make or receive payments on behalf of sanctioned persons. When you read that and then read the Minex FAQ, the crypto line doesn't feel like marketing flair. It feels like a procurement option bolted onto an existing sanctions evasion machine. Treasury's more recent designations keep pointing to the same architecture. Front companies, exchange houses, offshore accounts, and now crypto rails used as part of settlement. Treasury press releases in 2025 described these shadow banking networks as a way to move oil proceeds and funnel money toward Iran's military and defense apparatus. The numbers are not hypothetical. The Associated Press reported that on September 16, 2025, the U.S. sanctioned Iranian nationals and a network of entities in places including Hong Kong and the UAE, accusing them of facilitating more than $100 million in cryptocurrency transactions derived from Iranian oil sales for the benefit of Iran's government and military. Reuters, covering the same enforcement moment, described U.S. allegations that the network used front companies and cryptocurrency schemes as part of a shadow banking system to evade sanctions and support Iran's military. Chainalysis, analyzing the action, framed it as OFAC targeting an Iranian shadow crypto banking network and said the designations were tied to crypto transactions that benefited Iran's military and defense apparatus, funded by oil proceeds. So picture the progression. First, a world where payment is the weak link, banks, wires, compliance. Then, a world where payment is outsourced to networks designed to survive scrutiny, exchange houses, shell companies, intermediaries. Now a world where a state-linked arms exporter signals, publicly, that it will accept crypto and barter as routine settlement methods. In that world, sanctions don't disappear. They just arrive later, after value has already moved, after the invoice has already been cleared, after the buyer feels committed, after the hardware is already in motion. That's the shift worth sitting with.
The first thing this does is force us regulators and risk teams to stop treating crypto sanctions evasion as a side channel. When a state-linked arms exporter puts crypto on the invoice as a normal payment method, the compliance question stops being are bad actors using our rails and becomes are our rails being positioned as the workaround. Coindesk's reporting on Mindex makes that shift hard to ignore because it about an underground broker whispering ops in S about a public-facing export entity advertising that settlement can be whatever cryptocurrency a buyer and seller agree on. This is where stablecoins and the plumbing underneath them matter more than the headlines about Bitcoin. The practical appeal for sanctioned trade is usually a dollar proxy that moves fast and doesn't require a Western bank to sign off at the moment of payment. TRM Labs, looking at Iran's crypto economy in 2025, described a market concentrated in one dominant exchange Nobotex and one dominant network driven largely by TRC20 USDT flows. TRM said Nobotex handled more than 87% of transaction volume linked to Iranian entities, and that roughly $2 billion of about $3 billion processed in the first half of 2025 moved over Tron, mainly in TRC20 USDT and TR. That kind of concentration is a gift and a warning at the same time. It makes enforcement targets clearer, and it means a handful of choke points can suddenly carry outsized geopolitical weight. The US Treasury has been spelling out why those choke points matter. In its September 16, 2025 announcement targeting a network supporting Iran's military, Treasury describes shadow banking structures that use front companies and offshore accounts to move oil proceeds and funnel funds toward Iran's defense apparatus. Reuters reported Treasury's allegation that the same ecosystem leaned on front companies and cryptocurrency schemes to evade sanctions while supporting the IRGC-QF and Iran's defense ministry ecosystem. The Associated Press reported U.S. accusations that facilitators moved more than $100 million in cryptocurrency transactions tied to Iranian oil sales for the benefit of Iran's government and military. If you're a U.S.-based exchange, a stablecoin issuer, a payments company, or a bank offering crypto services, that is not background noise. That is the compliance perimeter expanding in real time. There's a second-order effect too: policy momentum. Stablecoins were already under the microscope because they're the bridge between crypto markets and dollar-like settlement. TRM Labs 2025-26 Global Crypto Policy Review said stablecoins were a major focus for policymakers and that over 70% of jurisdictions in its review progressed stablecoin regulation in 2025. A story like this pours fuel on that. It hands every skeptic the same talking point. If a sanctioned state can plausibly route payments for military exports through dollar-pegged tokens, then stablecoin governance is no longer only a consumer protection debate. It becomes a national security debate, and those debates rarely end with a light regulatory touch. What makes it messier is the way Iran's domestic crypto ecosystem appears to be pulled in two directions at once. Citizens using it to escape currency pressure and the state seeing it as a pressure valve for sanctions. TRM Labs said a June 2025 escalation between Iran and Israel triggered a sharp wave of capital flight from Iranian exchanges, with outflows from Nobitex surging more than 150% over the prior week, and moving toward global exchanges or payment providers with limited KYC for smaller transactions, as well as high-risk platforms with no KYC. That's the same dynamic US enforcement fears. When stress hits, funds don't politely line up at regulated exits, they bolt. Now add the arms export angle. The Financial Times described Mindex as offering advanced hardware missiles, drones, warships, air defense systems, and presenting crypto and barter as ways to pay while assuring buyers sanctions. Stopped delivery, and it reported the site was hosted on infrastructure already sanctioned by the US Treasury. That detail about sanctioned hosting matters for a very practical reason. It signals how close this is to existing enforcement territory. It's not a brand new universe. It says the same sanctioned ecosystem trying to formalize a payment option that says harder to interrupt. So what does the response look like on the US side? More designations, obviously, but also more private sector pressure where it hurts. Liquidity and conversion. Chainalysis is analyzing OFAC's September 2025 action, framed it as targeting an Iranian shadow crypto banking network, and described how facilitators coordinated crypto transactions tied to oil proceeds that benefited Iran's military and defense apparatus. That kind of analysis is what compliance teams feed into monitoring rules, wallet screening, and counterpart risk scoring. It also shapes what exchanges choose to delist, which jurisdictions they choose to avoid, and how aggressively stablecoin issuers freeze or refuse certain flows. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every clampdown creates incentives for the next workaround. Push hard on centralized exchanges and some flow migrates to brokers, OTC desks, and high-risk venues. Push there and you get more layering through shell companies and trade-based laundering, exactly the hybrid treasury keeps describing in its shadow banking write-ups. The Mindex crypto line is not a magic key, but it is a signal flare. It tells buyers and facilitators that Iran is willing to meet them in the part of the financial system where settlement can be faster than enforcement, and where attribution, even when it's possible, often arrives after the fact. Here's what should bother you. This ISNTA hacker forum pitching darknet deals. It's a state-linked export channel hinting that payment can be negotiated in crypto, like it's just another clause in a sales contract. That pushes the problem out of the crypto crime bucket and into the realm of strategic finance, how sanctions hold, how quickly they decay, and who gets to build the rails when the old ones get blocked. The US Treasury has already been treating Iran's shadow banking as a national security issue, not a paperwork problem, and the 2025 designations tied to crypto transactions and oil proceeds show how central the crypto layer has become in that ecosystem. If you're watching this as an investor or someone inside financial services, the takeaway isn't crypto is bad. It's that the compliance perimeter is going to keep expanding, and it rarely expands gently. Stablecoins are the obvious pressure point because they behave like portable dollars. An analysis from firms like TRM Labs has emphasized how concentrated Iran-linked flows can be around specific venues and networks, including heavy use of Tron-based USDT. That concentration cuts two ways. It makes enforcement more surgical, and it makes the blast radius bigger when enforcement hits. So you protect yourself by getting specific. Track OFAC updates and read the narratives. Not just the headlines. Treasury has been naming the mechanics: front companies, exchange houses, offshore nodes, crypto conversion. If you're in crypto markets, pressure test counterparties and liquidity sources. Ask where dollar-like settlement is really coming from. If you're in traditional finance, Dante assume me Dante touch crypto means you Dante touch crypto exposure. Shadow networks root around labels, not just platforms. FINCEN has been explicit that these systems are built to access the international financial system despite sanctions. Now the uncomfortable question I want you to answer in the comments. If sanctions states normalize weapons for crypto, what breaks first, the credibility of sanctions, the neutrality of stablecoin infrastructure, or the assumption that the dollar's reach is automatic? Drop your take below, hit like, subscribe, and keep this channel alive if you want more reporting grade breakdowns like this.